The acquisition of the $1.283 billion sale and purchase transaction between Seplat Energies and Mobil Producing Nigeria Unlimited, MPNU, has taken a new turn. The upstream regulator, the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, NUPRC, has rejected President Muhammadu Buhari's approval of Seplat's purchase of ExxonMobil's asset. A statement repudiating the ministerial approval exercised by President Buhari came a few hours after presidential spokesperson Femi Adesina had announced in a statement that President Buhari had approved the sale of ExxonMobil assets to Seplat Energy, an indigenous oil company. Joining us on the show this morning to discuss the ExxonMobil Seplat Energy share acquisition is Toyin Akinosho, publisher, Africa Oil and Gas Report. Good morning and welcome to the morning show.
Good morning to you, and thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So what do you make of the announcement made by President Buhari, only to be repudiated hours later by Mr. Gbenga Komolafe of the NUPRC?
Okay, so let me take you from both perspectives of both the industry and the government. From what the president's statement, if you read the president's statement, he's basically saying that this is about benefiting the Nigerian investment environment. IOCs are leaving mature fields, and if they make investment, my interpretation of the letter of the president, if they make investments, they're allowed to leave when they want to leave. So that's what basically the president is saying. There should be an orderly transition of, interests. This is about managing the transition from, IOCs to maybe Nigerian stakeholders. All right, but what I sense that the NUPRC is saying, immediately, is a matter of procedure. If you are going to make the communication, you cannot be communicating directly to Seplat, and ExxonMobil. It should be the commission that should be doing the communication. That's my, original understanding of it. But the overall issue, to me, speaks of a very poor organization of Nigerian agencies. Why it's such a public spat, in my view, in the view of Africa Oil Gas Report. That you have 3 different press releases in the space of 4 hours, giving different interpretations to, the idea of how the ministerial consent should be determined. We first heard, from the president, and that's the highest office in the land, and that is the ministers, and we're dealing with the ministerial consent. So we think, on the surface, we say, oh, okay, the minister has granted consent, And then, Seplat itself releases a press release saying that they received a letter from the Honorable Minister of State, who essentially is the Deputy Minister of Petroleum Resources, conveying the minister's, approval, So those two are coming from, the ministers, the policy-making sector of the oil industry. And then just around the close of business, the regulator speaks and says, well, there hasn't been any consent. And what the regulator told us the last time, that there hadn't been any consent, was going to be the status quo. So this is not very good in the public. Number one, the whole idea that NNPC was moving against Seplat, in my view, has always been a sort of like poor marketing of Nigerian investment landscape. But then that's not even the point now. The point is, could the president make an announcement, even if it was wrong, to have done that procedurally? Could the NUPRC insist that he was wrong? And what does the NUPRC want? So my initial interpretation is that they wanted to be the one to communicate. But that's not, but one cannot be sure of that, The NUPRC may have a deeper reason, in their view, for going that public against the president. And it will be interesting to find out what it is. But for whatever it's worth, the Nigerian investment environment that has not, that has basically been taking a hit, that a whole lot of investors have been having challenges in terms of its clarity, in terms of even judicial exercise, judicial hostility and all of that. It's not looking good with this, what you might call the divisiveness of the petroleum sector. Yes. Hello?
I can hear you. We can hear you. We can hear you, Mr. Akinosho.
Yes. So I just laid out what I thought. I wanted to see whether you have other questions.
I have more things to say, and good to see you again, Mr. Akinosho. I'd like to, pick your brain further on all of this. That when you look at it critically, yes, there's been discrepancy, between the NURPC and the federal government and all of that. What should we really understand as regards the state of play of these assets? From your experience in the oil and gas sector, it's a joint venture? Are assets individually owned by the NNPC? Or it's just shares? What's normally the state of play as regards assets when you have joint venture agreements like this?
Okay, so there's joint venture. On the one hand, there's ownership of shares of a company. On the other hand, it's not, this is not entirely the same. If you're selling out of a joint venture, if you're selling your stake in the joint venture, I understand, that NNPC can say, well, we need to ask because we're partner already, we're partners with you already, you sell it to us. But if you tell them that you just want to leave and you're selling your entire company to another organization, that's a different thing entirely, and that's where we are coming from. But and from my understanding is that the NNPC wanted, the president to approve, that any asset that is being divested, they will take it over, regardless of the mode of divestment, So the NNPC sees itself as, wanting to build up as an asset base, and then, if you understand what the industry is like, when you read end of year reports of those very massive financial statements of companies, the number of assets and the volumes of reserves that you have, is part of the if that is part of your appeal, for shares, in terms of capex, an understanding, by the financial community of what you're worth. And this is what NNPC wants to do. NNPC has realized that it's not able to, it's not a technically honed company. It cannot deliver on improved production and reserves. But it wants to take these assets, look around for companies that can help, to develop these assets and, make, profits along those lines. But those assets will be in his own books as being owned by NNPC. It is seeking to have that kind of conversation with Seplat, but Seplat really wants to operate these assets, if he gets it. This is what I think is playing out, But That probably is not what the regulator is saying. The regulator basically, has said yesterday that the president could not go out and say that he has, granted ministerial consent. My sense is that probably the NUPRC, recommended a decline, for these assets. That is also possible. On what basis? Maybe if you look at the letter that the press release that the regulator issued much earlier in the year, it was saying that ExxonMobil had not complied with the law. I don't understand what aspect of the law, because ExxonMobil simply wants to leave. They want to leave the shallow waters, and companies have left. Eland Oil and Gas has left. In this same kind of way. ConocoPhillips has left in this same kind of way. Those companies sold their shares. They didn't say when ConocoPhillips was selling to Oando, it didn't say they were selling the OMLs. It said they were selling their company, which is what ExxonMobil is doing. So there has been precedence. And so in law, if you're looking for, the law of precedence, there has been precedence in terms of, how companies have left and sort of like just handed over their entire shareholding, in that particular country. Ashland did the same thing much earlier. So we've had a number. So in terms of what you're asking, ExxonMobil is not selling its segments in OML 67, 68, 94, and one other, 104 or some 68, 69, I think, and 104. I don't think that's not what they are doing. They basically are selling Mobil Producing Nigeria Unlimited, the way Ashland sold Ashland, the way ConocoPhillips, sold its entire shares to Oando. They are selling their entire stakes, themselves as a company. So there's nothing different. They are selling themselves as a company. The way Eland Oil and Gas, which was listed in the UK, sold to Seplat, and this same government approved it. So I really don't understand why this is different. As far as I know, I know that, President Buhari has signed off on it, his Attorney General has signed off on it, So when the NUPRC says it is, saying it's complying with the American law, the Nigerian law, I really don't understand where that is coming from. But, the thing we have to realize is that the PIA vests in NUPRC the powers to recommend to the minister, whether he should grant or not grant, And what I don't know, what the law may, want to tell us is whether the minister can refuse what the NUPRC is recommending. That is the part that is a little bit challenging. But the PIA actually grants the NUP. And so that's what I think is playing out here. The NUPRC is saying, hang in there, I'm not agreeing to this. I've not said I've agreed to this, And, we're here. We will see. But for me, the optics are not good for Nigeria, for the Nigerian investment climate. It isn't. This is not a country that everybody is beating its past to come and invest. Now, that's the truth, And so, if a company is willing to spend $1.3 billion to actually acquire, and that company has done so well in terms of production, over time, I think we should give that company a chance. And in terms of contrast, anyway, the NMTC is not part of this conversation, so let me just leave them out.
Well, thank you for that. Seplat might still get their chance yet. This might be more of a delay than an outright refusal, but there is no dichotomy at this point. I want to read from a statement granted by Seplat Energy PLC back in February when the deal was initially announced that it had entered into an agreement to acquire the entire share capital of MPNU and ExxonMobil from ExxonMobil. And it says, the statement says, this is the first transaction to be announced since the Nigerian government's recently ratified Petroleum Industry Act, PIA, and supports its key objectives. So I want to make it very clear that the PIA is the governing legislation here and not the Petroleum Act of 1969, which is what gives the Minister of Petroleum certain rights that have now been rescinded by the PIA and vested in the regulator, in the commission. So I just want to make that clear. Now, with regards to the noble intention behind the president's tweet yesterday, that announcement yesterday to drive foreign investment into Nigeria, as you have rightfully pointed out, it might have the opposite effect. What can be done at this point by the federal government to mitigate this? What can be done to sort of merge or unify the position that's been taken by the Minister of Petroleum and by the NUPRC to sort of save face at this point?
Yeah, some people will say if NUPRC wants to fight this and say that they are the last word on this law, should they have gone to the press? Should this not have been handled, at the level of a conversation? I mean, this is all government, But let me quickly agree with you that it's the last word is not what the minister really thinks, supposedly from what the PIA. And I'm not a lawyer. I need to be very careful. I'm just an industry observer, let's put it like that. And so, yes, it's not the Petroleum Act, it's not the NNPC Act, it's not the Petroleum Act. The PIA is the governing law. And the NUPRC is saying that if anybody is going to announce, it is us. If anybody is going to recommend, it is us. We haven't told anybody that we've recommended, And the president can't go around telling the media that it has, acceded to what we probably haven't even told him we have agreed to. So these are as I said, it's very poor optics. As for mitigation, I mean, I'm just an observer. I'm outside. What I think is that this whole missive back and forth should not have happened. It should have been done better. Maybe the NUPRC thinks that it's being disrespected and it has to come, this way. But genuinely, his statement is trying to say that this is the PIA that he's upholding, and that essentially at the end of the day, it is his own recommendation. As a matter of fact, the PIA says that if he does make a recommendation, say he declines, and the president or who is the minister, or the minister now goes ahead and grants consent, on what basis is he granting consent? Will when it's saying that there are no other parties, who should, be, the law doesn't recognize other parties making any recommendation. Why should the minister be recommending against his own wishes? But the NUPRC is, has his own, has enough media capacity to explain his own side of the story. The thing is that I do not think that this is good. This is good at all. As a matter of fact, the industry was very exultant, when they first learned about the president's statement. But then nobody asked the question, should the president have done this, or should it not have been the NUPRC, making the statement, But I think that at some point in time, the NUPRC was cut off, and because it was clear that the NUPRC probably wasn't in favor of this.
Okay.
My personal opinion is that this deal should go. Really, I think that attempting to say that this will not happen is really not good for Nigeria.
Okay.
That's my sense. But, the NUPRC is the regulator, yes.
Okay, Mr. Akinosho, real quickly, I'd like to get some things right. You talked about other deals that have gone through ConocoPhillips, you talked about Ashland and the likes. Were these JVs so that, we get clarification as regards that? Secondly, I'd like to ask, the NNPC2 recently commercialized. In fact, I was talking about IPO in a couple of years, and he talked about proudly the asset it's got, which I am sure that this same asset in contention was listed as part of those assets. And like you said, probably it will shop around for companies that can, flip this asset with it and make some money out of it, part of its own venture. So where I'm at sea is the fact that since that is there, and the Ministry of Finance is there, Treasury is there, all making the representation in the NNPC, and the president goes ahead and says, I accede to this, knowing that those assets are assets in contention with the NNPC. You should go to Seplat. What is happening? What is going on that we do not know?
I wish I knew. But let me quickly respond to the earlier question about whether those assets that had gone this route, whether they are JVs. The entire Ashland assets, which was bought by ADAX a long time ago in the mid-90s, 1990s. In the late 1990s. That entire set of assets was PSC, so it wasn't JV. But ConocoPhillips, sold in 2013 to Oando. JV assets. So that's the precedent. Eland Oil and Gas in roughly 2019 sold to Seplat, entirely. Eland is essentially a subsidiary of Seplat now. So those two, were approved by the minister. But as you also pointed out, those were pre-PIA, and now is the NUPRC who determines whether we should grant you, we should agree to your acquisition or not agree to your acquisition. I think everybody who is interested in the quality of in the improvement of the Nigerian industry, in the reverse of the decline of the Nigerian industry, will want this, to go through. And it's not because, Seplat has a very huge capacity for media, so I'm not even interested in whatever it is. But this is important, because, if you annul this, so what are you going? What point are you making? What exact point are you making? That's really it doesn't cut it for me. In terms of if you look at the entire spectrum of the Nigerian oil industry, you've got a sense that the Nigerian the IOCs, really don't want to play here unless there's some other thing. Maybe they want to look for other assets that are not these assets that's number one. Maybe they are worried about the spate of vandalism. Maybe they are worried about, they're going elsewhere, which, have bigger resources, to start with, and more favorable climates. But we have an opportunity that most other African countries don't have. We've basically been grooming a bunch of independents who have been operating assets. There are two sets of them. One set, is a set of poor operators, no less than 5 or 6 companies that own sizable shares in E&P assets, and they are very poor at engaging, at, you know, at financing, at investing. And then there's a bunch that is extremely good. And I think that Seplat belongs to that bunch. And I think that, you know, this is some, I mean, it will help, you know, that this goes forward so that these other, you know, I mean, other companies that are interested in investing can also come forward. The companies that are very, very technically sound and have sound governance principles and, you know, think in terms of ESGs, you know, I mean, and, you know, the companies that tick all these boxes, we should encourage them to come and make investment. And I think that annulling anything about they trying to take over doesn't help. Because at the end of the day, you cannot force the ExxonMobils and the Shells and the Chevrons and the ENIs of this world to stay here. Of all the major oil-producing countries, and I need to say this here, of all the major oil-producing countries, these companies, you know, of all the major oil-producing countries in Africa, these companies are only leaving Nigeria in the way they are living. They are not leaving Egypt. They are not leaving Algeria. I mean, even with the challenges that Algeria has had, ENI is signing in back. Total is signing in a number of deals, you know, petroleum sharing contracts. And Angola is getting the same traction, you know, and those are comparative, you know, oil, I mean, hydrocarbon economies like us. But these companies are leaving Nigeria in the way that they are not living elsewhere. So when people say that it's just in places where the volumes are high that they are going, what about Egypt? Egypt doesn't have anything spectacular relative to Nigeria. But, you know, there's a reason why, you know, they participate in the bid rounds and they are keen, you know. And there's a reason. I'm deliberately not mentioning countries like Mozambique, which are newcomers, or Senegal, which are newcomers. I'm talking about countries that have gone this path like us. So it's not when, I mean, so this argument that they are living mature basins, it doesn't even, you know, come in here now, because Algeria is a mature basin, and ENI and others, you know, want to be, they still want to play that space. You know, Egypt is a mature basin, and Chevron wants to play the space, you know. Chevron wants to play the space the way they are not ready to play the space in Nigeria. I mean, there's a problem, you know. So once you do know that there is, what are the alternatives? We have always had independents trying to do something. And I think that what we should do is to encourage these independents, you know. The ones that you can encourage, and the ones that you can't encourage, you use, you know, the law to deal with them, to ensure that they do what they should do. I like a regulatory posturing that says that this is, you know, we're for this, you know, this is the law. I do like that kind of posturing. But what I don't get is, you know, if those reasons that you are alluding are stuff that you can mitigate in other ways, you know, if you're just, you know, as we used to say in school, you just want to do shangri, you know, I mean, that shouldn't be the way that we should regulate the industry. That's an opinion.
Well, I haven't heard the term shangri in years. Sorry, that was so funny. But we have mature basins, don't we, in our onshore and shallow waters. But we also have the added problem of aged oil wells. Oil is a finite resource, so we have two problems. But I wanted to ask you now, and we also have oil theft and those security problems. So we have multi-hydra-headed problems here. But now I wanted to ask you a question about the structure of this agreement. So shares of MPNU are being sold to Seplat. MPNU also holds assets. Those assets are governed by a JOA, Joint Operating Agreement. Is it possible to separate the company from its assets? Since MPNU cannot dispose of its assets however it likes, since it's bound by this JOA.
Yes, it is possible for a company to separate, and that's what companies do when they see, when there's a conundrum about, selling. I mean, this whole idea that, there's an asset and there's a company has been tested, elsewhere on the continent too, and what has happened over, I mean, if you say, for example, you've sold, you want to leave, you're leaving and you're selling to somebody else, I mean, you can't be stopped from leaving. Should you be stopped from leaving? I mean, that's the way we should look at it. If this happens, in which we create a situation in which we're saying that even when you want to live entirely and, you can't gain the economic benefit of living, then you send the signal that I would not come. I mean, I'm not going to show up, so other people will be looking at you and looking at what you've done with this particular guy. Because don't forget that part of what, when you go on investment roadshows, part of what you say is that you will take your money out. You will be able to take your money out.
But nobody's stopping Exxon from leaving. Right?
And
it's just the law.
What these guys are.
I said, but nobody's stopping Exxon from leaving. It's just the law.
So I understand what you're saying, but it is an asset. There's an asset issue. I mean, if you're so how do they leave if they are not going to get paid? So you're saying, okay, if you're leaving, I mean, when you say it's just the law, can you give me excerpts of the law that you are referring to that says that, okay, you're leaving, you can't make economic benefits of, I mean, you can't gain the value of the assets that you've developed, and leave, I mean, if you give me a sense of, because I've gone through the PIA and I can't.
Okay.
And, so that's a big challenge for me.
Okay, Mr. Akinosho, nobody's saying Exxon can't leave. It's about the assets MPNU has got in a joint venture, which they have assets, and those assets belong to them. And it's a back and forth over assets. Nobody's talking about ExxonMobil not being able to leave. But they have a JV, and that's why I specifically asked you about the case of Konoko and all of them, even before this PIA was signed. So it is their own assets that we're talking in question. And you were talking concerning the law. Section 95, yes. Subsection 14 and 15. 15 precisely says, an holder of petroleum exploration license shall not assign, novate, or transfer his license to any power interest without the prior written consent of the commission. So it's as simple as that. So a lot of people ask that, why didn't they tidy up things with the commission? All right. 14 talks about, for the purpose of section, change of control means any person acting jointly or in concert to acquire direct or indirect beneficial ownership of a percentage of the voting power of the outstanding voting security of the holder by contracts, which is a contract involved here, or otherwise that exceeds 50% at any time. So that's what is stated according to the law. Why can't we follow the law? Simple.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. But when you talk about best practices, what you're saying is that, I mean, so it takes. Is it? I mean, so why would you want to disagree that they will leave the assets and sell that asset, that they will, if they want to sell their own shares, to some other company, that a company is buying MPNU. What would that company be buying? Why would even when you have, these words of the law, you are looking for what is the letter? What does the law want to say in terms of what is a proper investment climate? If you cannot, sell your shares, to somebody else and leave, that what you have is what you have. If you have a landed property in Nigeria, as a company, which deals in grocery, so are you going to say that, okay, you can't, that land in Oniru cannot then be transferred, somewhere in VI, cannot then be transferred to the company that is taking over, that's, foreign grocery shop. That's what you're telling me, So, the country has to be thinking in terms of, and I'm sure that's the whole point of the PIA, in terms of who is willing to bring in the money to invest, to create jobs, to carry out innovative experiments, to improve, the economy, to enlarge the industrial space. That's what PIA wants to do.
Okay.
So if you understand what I'm saying, okay. That grocery shop that is leaving the country, if it has bought that land in that place, is it going to say what I'm handing over to you does not include the land? I don't get it.
Okay.
That's.
Thank you so much, Mr. Akinosho.
It's just the beginning of a conversation that is going to continue. Yes.
Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you for throwing light on this matter for us.